No? Can we go back to your opening statement on Ukraine?
Sure.
Very simple question. Do you consider that the ceasefire and the Minsk agreement are dead?
We don't consider it as dead, no. We remain gravely concerned by reports that Russia-backed separatists continue to attack Debaltsevo and are violating the ceasefire in numerous other locations in Donetsk and Luhansk. The government of Ukraine also reports that some of its forces were fired upon even as they conducted an orderly withdrawal from Debaltsevo. Reports indicate that separatists publicly declared that they refused to observe the ceasefire in Debaltsevo and had a, quote, right to shell Debaltsevo because it was, quote, their territory. The OSCE reports that the Russia-backed separatists continue to deny monitors access to Debaltsevo and warns of grave consequences of those in the city if the ceasefire is not implemented there. The OSCE also confirms that ceasefire violations in Ukraine's east continue, as was the case yesterday, but the quantity and intensity of attacks has decreased, with the dramatic exception, of course, being Debaltsevo, as I just outlined. We've also seen reports of the withdrawal of certain types of heavy weapons in various parts of Donetsk and Luhansk by both separatists and Ukrainian government forces. We can't confirm these without access by OSCE monitors, some of whom have obviously been trying to gain access. But we remain focused on supporting the implementation of this agreement. Obviously, if the separatist violence continues, if Russia and the separatists do not implement the agreement, if fighters and equipment continue to flow into Ukraine from Russia, more costs will be imposed, and there will certainly be a serious discussion within the international community.
Does the taking of or the withdrawal of the Ukrainian troop army from Debaltsevo and the taking of it by the separatists, is that cause in itself for more sanctions?
I wouldn't put it in those terms. Obviously, President Poroshenko made a statement that the Ukrainian government forces are conducting an orderly withdrawal. The Ukrainian government, as a sovereign government, has the right to make decisions about how to protect their people. The lines that both sides are required to withdraw to still remain part of the agreement, but obviously we look at events on the ground and determine how to proceed from there.
Right, but in and of itself, the fact that the ceasefire, you said the ceasefire was obviously being violated in and around Debaltsevo, and the Ukrainian military was forced out. You're not saying that is necessarily a trigger in itself for
I have
additional
no sanctions
costs.
to announce or predict today. No.
Sure.
Go ahead, Michael.
Just on Ukraine.
Sure.
To clarify, last Friday, you in a statement you noted that Russian military forces, regular forces, were involved in the attack on Debaltsevo. In your statement, you said you were pressing Russia and the separatists to stop the fighting. Are Russian military forces and not merely the separatists, have they been involved in the fighting in recent
Over the last few
hours?
days, Michael, I don't think
Since the ceasefire was supposed to have gone
Sure,
into
I understand
effect?
your question. I don't believe our concern has changed. I'm happy to check that level of specificity. As you know, we've been concerned about their involvement throughout. Obviously, our statement on Friday was particularly fine-pointed on that, but I can check and see.
I think it's important to know if the Russian military per se, since the ceasefire, has been involved in the attacks, and not just the separatists. Also, you just said that you continue to have concerns about Russian military equipment flowing into Ukraine, and the other day you mentioned reports of a convoy of Russian equipment heading toward Debaltsevo. Is Russian military equipment, has that continued to flow since the ceasefire, and can you confirm now that there was such a convoy?
We don't have new details to confirm today. It's challenging, as you know, because the OSCE monitors are not able to see what's happening on the ground. So we've seen reports, but don't have new details to confirm.
And lastly, in their readout of the call with Secretary Kerry, the Russian Foreign Ministry, which put out a version of this earlier today, said that Lavrov had made the point that the Ukrainian government should be in direct negotiation or dialogue with the separatist leaders. They seem to have in mind a process that would supplant the diplomatic arrangements that have taken place in Minsk that would involve direct negotiations between sort of two equal parties, the Ukrainian government and the separatist leadership. What is your response to that suggestion on behalf by Minister Lavrov. Is that an approach the United States would welcome, or does it think it's not really the road you want to go down diplomatically at this juncture?
I think, as you know, the separatists have been a part of, as have the Russians, these negotiations, and they've also signed off on these agreements. So obviously we continue to support dialogue. The Ukrainians remain open to and have consistently invited the separatists to be a part of dialogue. But right now we believe the focus should be on implementing what they just signed a week ago that builds on the agreement they all signed in September.
In any area where the violence has subsided since the signing of the ceasefire?
Well, the areas outside of Debaltsevo, and obviously we've seen some violence in Donetsk and Luhansk, but we have seen, though, according to the OSCE, other areas where there has been a reduction in violence. Any more in Ukraine before we continue? Go ahead.
Yeah, speaking today from Hungary, President Putin, when asked if about possible consequences if the U.S. provides lethal weapons to Ukraine, responded that, according to his information, that these weapons are already there. Does
That's
President
incorrect.
Putin? That's incorrect. Mm-hmm. So his accusation that the U.S. is supplying weapons to lethal weapons to Ukraine is not correct.
Correct. It is incorrect. Yes. More in Ukraine before we continue. Pam, go ahead.
In yesterday's briefing, when we were talking about ceasefire violations in Ukraine, you mentioned that the international community needed to give the diplomatic process a chance to play out. In light of today's developments, where are we with that? Is the United States closer to saying perhaps that it's time to set a deadline for this, or time to look at some other alternatives, considering that the Russian-backed offensive is continuing?
Well, we remain focused on supporting the implementation of this agreement. Obviously, we're very concerned about the violence that we've seen in Debaltsevo and some areas of Donetsk and Luhansk. We have seen intensity of attacks decrease in some areas, as confirmed by the OSCE. We've also seen reports of heavy weapons in various parts of Donetsk and Luhansk be pulled back. So right now, we believe we still need to continue to give time for the agreement to work itself through. It doesn't change the fact that we have a range of options, as does the international community, and those options remain just as they were 2 weeks ago.
I'm not sure I understand. You want time to allow the agreement to work its way through, but I mean, it seems that the agreement is already done with.
Well, Matt, again, I think there are some areas where we have seen some action, like a reduction in violence, pullback of weapons. We've seen some reports of that. We believe that we need to give it some time to continue to have the agreement implemented. Obviously, there are some violations, and is it perfect? No, but we don't think the alternative or the right option is to take steps that would hurt the implementation of the agreement.
And those steps meaning the supply of lethal weapons, more sanctions?
Obviously, we haven't made a decision on defensive weapons. We have a range of options on sanctions. That remains the case. I don't have anything to predict on those. We watch day by day, and I certainly expect we'll continue to discuss this day by day based on what the events on the ground are.
But so you think that both sides should continue to implement the details of the agreement?
Correct.
Even though there never was a ceasefire, even
there have certainly been violations, Matt, but we continue to remain focused on the implementation of the agreement.
I have a Russia-related question.
Okay, go ahead.